My name is Cora Vance, and I am 38 years old, Ater 1, on the third morning of our anniversary getaway in Costa Rica. My husband's work wife walked up to our breakfast table wearing his favorite shade of midnight blue. Her name was Chloe. She ordered his exact breakfast preference before he could even look at the menu, and my husband laughed, treating it like a charming quirk instead of a warning sign. I had spent 8 months planning that trip. I paid for my own plane ticket because Arthur claimed the company's travel hub had secured him a corporate rate, and it was cleaner to keep the bookings separate. Back home in Richmond, Virginia, my family thought I was the luckiest woman in the city. What I discovered in his leather duffel 2 days later would shatter our marriage. What I did with that discovery 3 months afterward would shatter a great deal more. And absolutely no one saw it coming from the quiet, accommodating Cora. Welcome back to Their Secret Stories, the channel where women who are told to play nice finally lay out the facts calmly, from the very first page to the final ink stroke. If stories about betrayal, family expectations, and hard-fought boundaries speak to you, drop your city and local time in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button, settle in, and let's begin. This story starts at a sunny breakfast table in Tamarindo. To understand what happened, you need to know who I was before Costa Rica, because it explains every decision I made afterward. I have been a senior accountant at Vanguard Infrastructure Group for 14 years. 4th floor, general ledger, the desk with the heavy chrome tape dispenser. Arthur works there too. 6th floor, vice president of corporate partnerships, the man who could sell a bridge to a desert island. We met at a regional charity gala when I was 25. We were married a year later. For 12 years, I was the accommodating one. If a restaurant got our bill wrong, I didn't make a scene. I simply corrected the math on the merchant copy, paid the exact amount, and left a respectable tip. If Arthur forgot our anniversary, I told his mother it was my fault for hating a big fuss. I absorbed discrepancies. That was my role at Vanguard. And somewhere along the line, it became my role at home. My mother had been volatile, the kind of woman who could turn a quiet Sunday dinner into a courtroom trial. Growing up, I learned that silence was how you survived, so I stayed calm. I stayed quiet. I used to believe that silence was a fair trade, peace in exchange for keeping my mouth shut. It took me 8 years to actually run the numbers on that trade. Quiet was never a yes. I just didn't realize it yet. Here is the other detail you should know. The woman at that breakfast table in Tamarindo was not a complete stranger to me. I had met Chloe Sterling 18 months prior at our annual autumn gala. And I had spent every single one of those 18 months convincing myself that what I saw that night was harmless. I'm an accountant. I know the exact moment a spreadsheet is lying to me. At the autumn gala 18 months ago, in a historic manor ballroom with an open bar, the partnership department was being loud in the corner as usual. I was standing with some of the other spouses when I heard my husband start to deliver a punchline. A woman I had never met finished it with him, word for word, in perfect synchronization. It was an inside joke about a client in Norfolk, involving a crane collapse and a wet suit. I had never heard that story in my life. Chloe Sterling was 29, a new analyst on the partnership's team, and she laughed with her palm resting flat on Arthur's lapel, as if she were checking the weight of his fabric. I want to be fair here. A hand on a lapel is not an affair. A shared joke is not an affair. But I balance ledgers for a living, and I know that corporate fraud never begins with a stolen million. It begins with a single dollar placed in the wrong column, while everyone else pretends not to notice. That night I brought it up calmly in the car, hands folded in my lap. Arthur didn't snap. He did something far more effective. He looked at me with warm, patient pity, telling me she was just a junior colleague, that I was exhausted, and that the holidays always brought out my mother's anxieties in me. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I was the one apologizing. Even so, I set one boundary: no messaging her after 10 at night. Arthur agreed so quickly it felt like a peace offering. 2 weeks later, I woke up at midnight to find his face illuminated by a blue glow. It wasn't a text message. It was Base Camp, a workplace management app, a professional channel, a work wife. Technically, he hadn't broken the rule. That is the defining trait of men like my husband. They don't break boundaries, they simply relocate them. The Costa Rica trip was supposed to be our reset, 12 years of marriage, and 1 solid year of Arthur being everywhere except present at home. In February, he stood in our kitchen and said, "Let me make this right." He would handle all the arrangements. He knew an resort on Playa Conchal from a previous trade summit. He would route the booking through Vanguard's corporate travel hub, he explained, because the company rate code would save us 40%. And he would square up the personal portion with payroll afterward. I will be completely honest with you, because I promised myself I would tell this story without hiding my own embarrassments. The forensic auditor in my head raised her hand. Using a corporate booking code for personal travel is a direct violation of company policy, a policy I helped write. But Arthur had a ready-made defense before I could voice the thought. Everyone does it, Cora. The travel hub loves me. It's an administrative rate code. And I wanted the trip. I wanted the version of us he was painting. Fresh fruit and no laptops. So I put my hand down. I paid for my own flight out of our joint checking account, saved the digital receipt, and convinced myself that kept the transaction clean. June arrived. At the gate in Richmond, Arthur was tapping away on his phone before boarding, smiling at the screen with an expression I recognized, the one that used to be reserved for me. I asked who was writing. "Just corporate," he said, turning the screen away slightly. "Just putting out a fire." The flight was long with a connection in San Jose, and he put out fires across the entire Caribbean. I watched him type, and I remember feeling a genuine sense of relief, thinking that whatever he was managing was thousands of miles behind us. It wasn't behind us. It landed on Tuesday, day 3. Our actual anniversary was that Friday. And I came down to breakfast wearing a green linen dress Arthur had bought me in Nosara on our 5th anniversary, feeling a sense of hope that still makes me wince. Chloe was already at our table. She was wearing midnight blue, drinking fresh passion fruit juice, and when the waiter arrived, she said, "He'll have the gallo pinto with fried eggs over medium," before my husband could even open his mouth. Arthur stood up and embraced her like a long-lost sister. Then he looked at my face, and his tone shifted into his smooth, boardroom delivery. "Fantastic news, honey. Chloe flew in for the Harrison Group dinner tonight. Half their development team is out here. It was too perfect an opportunity to miss. She's staying at the sister resort down the beach. It's completely professional." I sat down, I ate a slice of papaya as if it were a mandatory assignment. Upstairs an hour later, I was no longer calm. And I want you to hear exactly what he said to me, because entire marriages exist inside sentences like this one. He said, "You're being insecure, Cora. And it's not a good look. Men are allowed to have female friends. You've had my entire life for 12 years. Let me have one single friendship." Then he kissed my forehead, which was his preferred alternative to actually arguing, and went down to the pool. Here is the part I discovered by accident while trying to be helpful, which is how I uncovered everything in this story. That afternoon, he asked me to check his inbox for a digital boarding pass while he was in the shower. I happened to glance at his calendar for Tuesday. There was no Harrison Group dinner scheduled. There was nothing on Tuesday at all. Just a blank white square sitting on his screen like a lie with the lights turned off, while my husband sang in the shower. I did not make a scene. Anyone who grew up with a mother like mine knows that a scene would only become his primary piece of evidence. Proof that Cora is highly emotional, that Cora imagines threats out of thin air. So, I stayed quiet. But you have to understand what quiet means when an accountant is the one practicing it. Quiet does not mean blind. I began keeping a detailed record the exact same way I would if a supplier's invoices failed to balance. Dates, times, spoken phrases not to trap him, but to prove myself wrong. If you have ever loved a skilled liar, you know exactly how that mental loop feels. On day 5, Arthur went deep sea fishing with Chloe and some of the Harrison representatives, none of whom I ever actually saw. He asked me to pack his leather duffel bag for the return flight. After 12 years of marriage, he still couldn't fold a linen shirt properly. Inside the zippered pocket of the bag, I found a printed hotel folio, folded in thirds. It wasn't for our room. It was for 2 oceanfront villas at the sister Eco Lodge. 6 nights, one checked in under Sterling C, both rooms billed to a single account. And at the top of that billing line was a 9-digit cost code I knew better than my own social security number, because I reconciled it every single month against the general ledger on the 4th floor. Cost Center 5 and 500 BD, Vanguard Infrastructure, Business Development. My anniversary week, my husband's work wife's private villa, and the company was footing the bill for all of it. I stood in that room, thousands of miles from Virginia, holding the paper with 2 fingers as if it were toxic. And the first emotion I felt wasn't heartbreak. It was professional. Somebody's books were deeply compromised, and they were about to deal with me. We flew home. I gave our marriage one final, honest opportunity, because 12 years warrants a real conversation, and because I needed to see what he would say when I wasn't just speculating. Sunday evening, in our kitchen in Richmond, I laid it out plainly. I know Chloe's villa was charged to the company card. I know there was no Harrison Group dinner. Tell me the truth, and we will go to counseling. Arthur didn't even blink. He let out a soft, wary laugh, as if I were an intern who had misread a balance sheet. Honey, you're being paranoid. It was a block booking. Partnerships does it all the time. You're seeing conspiracies in corporate codes. Then he called his mother. I wish I were exaggerating. Monday evening, Beatrice sat in my living room with her designer handbag resting on her knees, explaining the nature of modern men to me. Men in this day and age need female companionship, sweetheart. That's just the corporate landscape now. You should be grateful he still comes home to your bed. My husband never joined the conversation. Every sentence felt like a small, customized casket with my name on it. I tried my best friend, Fiona, next. We had been close since our community college days. She listened, winced, and then delivered the line that made me realize I was entirely on my own. I mean, Cora, did anything actually happen? Because if you push this, you're going to lose the house, the security, everything. All over a corporate expense report. I looked around my own living room and took inventory. A husband lying to my face, a mother-in-law defending him, a best friend advising me to surrender. In accounting, we refer to this as a control failure. Every single safeguard that was supposed to protect the system reported directly to the person I was attempting to audit. Fine. I had been asking people to believe me, which was my first tactical error, because belief is Arthur's personal currency, and he prints it at will. I stopped asking people to believe me. I started printing paper instead. Paper doesn't grow tired. Paper doesn't take sides. And paper has never once suggested that I was simply being insecure. The first documents I printed were our own bank statements, not ours, joint checking, joint savings. The accounts we had built together for 12 years like a shared investment. I sat down with a yellow highlighter on a Wednesday evening while Arthur was attending a local dinner, and I did for my marriage what I do for Vanguard every quarter, end close. In March, $5,000 had been moved from joint savings to an account ending in digits I didn't recognize. In April, 7,000 more. In May, there was a credit inquiry from an equity lender regarding refinancing our home, and I had never spoken to a lender in my life. My name is on that deed. No one had contacted me. I sat perfectly still at the kitchen table, feeling the entire temperature of the narrative shift. This wasn't about a workplace flirtation anymore. This was logistical. You don't relocate capital for a feeling. You relocate capital for a strategy. And then I uncovered the invoice that revealed exactly how far ahead of me he was. A retainer of $1,800 paid in February to a firm called Warwick Matrimonial. February, the exact same month he had stood in our kitchen with his hands on my shoulders and said, "Let me make this right. Let me book Costa Rica. Let me fix us." He hadn't been booking a romantic getaway. He had been booking a runway, the trip, the shared laughs, the Gallo Pinto. All of it occurred after he had already sat in a family lawyer's office and calculated the exact cost of ending our marriage. I closed the folder. I aligned its edges perfectly. Somewhere upstairs, the shower turned on. My husband was home from a business dinner that likely never took place, and I remember thinking with absolute clarity, all right, he has a head start. But I count much faster. Sylvia Thorne's office was located above a coffee roastery on Monument Avenue, and the entire space smelled of roasted hazelnut and legal ink. She was in her late 50s, with a sharp silver bob and reading glasses resting on a chain. She let me speak for 10 uninterrupted minutes without touching her pen. Then she asked her questions. "Virginia is a no-fault state," she explained. "So the infidelity itself earns you sympathy in court, not financial leverage. But asset dissipation is a different matter. If marital funds were used to finance this woman, trips, gifts, hotel villas, a judge can debit that directly against his portion of the estate." Then she leaned forward. "Here is what you need to understand, Cora. You bring me cold documents, not warm feelings. No searching his personal phone. No secret recordings. Nothing that would make a judge question our ethics. Bank records with your name on them are yours to access. Anything belonging strictly to his employer is off limits. Do you understand?" I told her I understood. I understand rules better than almost anyone, which is precisely why I know exactly where every single one of them terminates. Then she asked what I did for a living. When I told her, senior accountant 14 years, ledger control, Sylvia Thorne removed her glasses and looked at me as if I had just dealt her an unexpected winning card. "And where exactly do you work?" she asked. "That's the complicated part," I replied. "The same corporation as him. Vanguard Infrastructure Group, 4th floor." She remained quiet for a moment. Then she said something I carried in my mind for weeks, like a heavy weight in my pocket. "Mrs. Vance, I can secure you a highly favorable divorce with what is in this folder. But whatever is happening on that company's ledger is outside my jurisdiction. And it isn't yours either, unless you are prepared for what exposing it will cost you." I didn't know the price yet. I was about to find out. The reality of my job is that I didn't even have to go looking for the evidence. The mid-year close arrived in July, just as it does every single year. Reconciling the partnership cost centers was assigned to my team, because that is quite literally what the 4th floor exists to do. I was given the final roll up as usual, and cost center 5500 BD walked right into my spreadsheet on its own 2 feet. I ran the 18-month trend line, because analyzing trends is the core of my job. Then I ran it again, because I couldn't believe the data the first time. The partnership development budget had expanded by 40% over those 18 months, while actual regional client revenue had grown by a mere 4%. The general ledger was bloated with travel expenses, luxury eco lodges, upgraded suites. Same-day double airfare bookings, always featuring one primary employee traveler and one guest profile with no corporate ID attached. The dates aligned perfectly with a calendar I now knew by heart. A project launch in Sedona, a development summit in Savannah, a partnership conference in Seattle that Arthur had described to me over dinner as exhausting. Honey, absolutely brutal. 18 months. The exact same 18 months. I sat at my desk, letting my coffee grow cold, and realized that Costa Rica was not an isolated slip-up. Costa Rica was a standard line item in a recurring program, and the program had an established budget. My anniversary had simply been absorbed into it, the same way you might fold a personal coffee into a business lunch expense. The monitor glowed. The office hummed. 2 floors above me, my husband was likely laughing at someone's joke. I had discovered the edge of something far larger than my marriage. And the accountant and the wife inside me looked at one another and asked the only question that truly mattered. How many trips, and who authorized them? I made one more attempt at home because I am nothing if not thorough, and because some small part of me still wanted him to save himself from what was coming. Saturday morning, coffee sitting between us, I placed the Tamarindo Hotel folio on the counter and said a single sentence. Explain the second villa to me as if I were the internal auditor, Arthur, because eventually someone will be. My husband looked at the paper, looked up at me, and delivered a line I want printed somewhere permanent, because it is the closest he ever came to revealing his true nature. It's just numbers, Cora. Don't turn it into a drama, just numbers. From a man whose entire existence was built on narratives, who had never encountered a figure he couldn't wrap in a convincing story. He claimed the trip was part of a committed budget allocation, that finance trusted him completely, and that I, of all people, should understand how discretionary spending functions. Then he picked up the folio, folded it along my creases, slid it into his pocket, and smiled as if the matter were settled. What he did next spoke far louder than any verbal defense. On Monday, an adjusted invoice entry appeared in the corporate system for the Costa Rica trip. It had been resubmitted, reclassified with an administrative note regarding a booking discrepancy, and backdated with approvals that had not existed the previous Thursday, because on Thursday I had checked. He knew I was watching. His response wasn't to halt the behavior, his response was to tidy up the records. That frightened me more than any shouting would have, because tidying requires fluency. Tidying meant he had performed this exact cleanup before and knew exactly which drawers to hide the files in. I stood in my kitchen, watching him whistle through breakfast, and felt the final soft piece of my heart quietly close its ledger. He wanted it to be just numbers. Fine. Numbers are my primary language, and he was about to hear me speak it. In September, my husband appeared to come back to me. At least, that was the perception from the outside. He was home by 6, brought home flowers on Fridays, and took me to the steakhouse where he had proposed, his hand resting warm against my back as he told the host we were celebrating being incredibly lucky. Chloe had been transferred to our Charlotte office that same month, a promotion on paper. Arthur mentioned it casually. See, honey, nothing to fret over. She's 2 hours away now. I want to be completely honest about this part of the story, too. It worked to a degree. You can know exactly what a man is orchestrating, yet still feel your body lean toward the familiar warmth, because that warmth was real once, and grief has terrible aim. For about 2 weeks, I let myself wonder if the folder in my desk could simply remain a folder. Peace was right there, easily accessible and comfortable. All I had to do was what I had always done, absorb the discrepancy. Then came the orchids, 24, delivered directly to the 4th floor where my entire team could see them with a small, elegant card that read, "To my Cora." 12 years and counting. The women in ledger control sighed. I read the card twice, and the floor seemed to tilt slightly under my feet, the way a balance sheet does when a total is off by a single penny, and you know that penny is a symptom of a much larger error. It wasn't his handwriting. It wasn't even close. His assistant had ordered my forever the exact same way she ordered his lunches and his corrected expense reports. I stood there holding proof that even his remorse was outsourced. And I finally understood the entire system I was married to. The emotions were outsourced. Only the public image was managed personally. I placed the card in the folder with everything else. Exhibit nothing, Sylvia Thorne would call it. But it mattered to me. On the Friday of our anniversary trip in Costa Rica, Arthur had given me a jade necklace. A deep green stone on a silver clasp shaped like a leaf in a box from a hide jeweler in Tamarindo. He had fastened it around my neck at a table overlooking the ocean, said, 12 years, Cora, and appeared to mean it, whatever meaning meant to him. I had worn it every single day since, even after finding the folio, even after discovering Warwick Matrimonial, because it was the one element from that entire week that felt as if it belonged strictly to the two of us. You already know where this is heading. I wish I had. Late on a Tuesday in September, while reviewing the quarterly expense details for Cost Center 5500 BD, I was scanning line by line through vendor payments when I hit an entry dated the afternoon before our anniversary dinner. Line 41 of the ledger detail. Vendor. Tamarindo. Amount 20100. Category Corporate Hospitality Gift. Approved by A. Vance. I stared at the screen. Then I looked down at my own collarbone, where the jade sat warm against my skin. The room went entirely silent. My anniversary present was a business expense. I was the client being appreciated. 12 years of marriage, and the man had found a way to make his employer pay for loving me. And the absolute worst part, the detail that still keeps me awake at 2 a.m, is that it was efficient. I sat alone on the 4th floor for a long time, my thumb resting on the silver clasp. Somewhere in that hour, the question stopped being what did he do, and transformed into something much colder and far more useful. What am I willing to sign my name to? I didn't take the necklace off that night. I wanted to feel the physical weight of it a little longer, so I wouldn't soften when it mattered. Let me pause right here and ask you a question, one woman to another. Has a physical object ever revealed the truth to you before a person did? A receipt, an unexpected key, a piece of jewelry. Tell me your story in the comments, because I read every single one. And if this narrative is landing somewhere tender, subscribe to their secret stories and stay with me. It gets worse before it gets resolved. I confronted him with my own neck. That sounds bizarre, but that is exactly how it transpired. Wednesday night, back in the kitchen. Our entire marriage seemed to end in that kitchen in slow installments. I held up the jade stone and said, Mariposa Jewelers 2100 Corporate Hospitality, your approval code. Am I the corporate partner, Arthur? Or am I the hospitality? He was exhausted that night, or perhaps just overconfident, and for once his mask slipped sideways instead of coming off entirely. What came out of his mouth was worse than any lie. You get a $2,000 necklace, and you're still finding things to complain about. Do you hear yourself? Most wives would say thank you. There it was, men need female friends wearing a different coat. The gift wasn't an apology. The gift was a receipt, proof of purchase for my ongoing silence, and he genuinely could not comprehend why the merchandise was complaining. And then, standing in that kitchen, my husband did the one thing I never anticipated. He became honest just for a brief moment. He sat down at the table, rubbed his eyes, and told me about being 9 years old in Scranton, about the winter the power was cut, about learning that if you could make the utility worker laugh, the disconnect notice got delayed for another month. Charm was survival, Cora, he said, his voice so quiet I almost missed the words. You think I'm lying to people. I'm just keeping the lights on the only way I know how. For 60 seconds, I saw him completely. A terrified child in an expensive suit who never truly believed the lights would stay on by themselves. And I felt the dangerous pull of loving him again. Then the minute passed. He adjusted his collar, flashed his partnership team's smile, and asked, "So are we good?" We were not good. But I finally knew exactly what I was dealing with. Here is the fork in the road, and I want to walk you through it slowly, because from the outside it looks straightforward, but from the inside, it was the loneliest math I have ever performed. Vanguard has an integrity hotline, an anonymous intake portal, followed by a formal, signed affidavit if the investigation proceeds, protected under corporate policy and federal law because we are a publicly traded entity. I opened the submission form on a Thursday evening at my kitchen table, and then I sat there, the cursor blinking, calculating the cost of filing. If I filed and the charges stuck, Arthur wouldn't just face administrative discipline. 18 months of luxury hotel suites doesn't get you a warning. It gets you terminated for cause and potentially prosecuted, and every single dollar of income that a divorce court would use to determine my support settlement would disappear along with his security badge. The house would have to be sold. Sylvia Thorne had been very direct about my exposure. Filing meant burning down my own financial security to expose the truth of his. Not filing meant a clean, quiet divorce, respectable support keeping the house, and placing one more silence onto the pile. The heaviest silence yet. Load-bearing this time. I want to be honest, I did not feel courageous. I felt like a woman being handed the bill for a meal everyone else had enjoyed. I saved the submission form as a draft and closed my laptop, and I am not ashamed to tell you that it remained a draft for 9 days. What caused me to reopen it wasn't bravery. It was an email that arrived the following Friday from HR. Subject line: conflict of interest review. Your access to regional partnership accounts. Someone had flagged me. Before I had ever submitted a single document, someone had gone to HR and beaten me to the door. And I think you already know who taught him that specific maneuver. The meeting took place in a small office with our HR director, Anika, and a speakerphone with Chief Legal Officer Sinclair on the line. Everyone was incredibly polite. That is the most painful part of these situations. Everyone is polite while they dismantle you. Given your current domestic situation, Vance, Anika said delicately, the company feels it is cleanest to temporarily remove you from any ledgers touching the partnership division while things. She paused, searching for a neutral term, settle. My reconciliation duties were reassigned. My mid-year close roll-ups were reassigned. 14 years of flawless service, and I was escorted back to my desk like a liability, and the Whisper network had already been fed. By Wednesday, I heard my own story narrated back to me in the break room by a colleague who didn't realize I was standing around the corner. Apparently, Cora has been struggling since they separated, digging through his old travel expenses, looking for a mistress. It's so sad. She used to be so professional, word for word, almost the exact phrasing Arthur had used at our kitchen table. Paranoid, seeing conspiracies in corporate codes. He had secured the corporate narrative first, the same way he had secured the lawyer first, his mother first, and Fiona first. That was the week I finally understood the layout of the game board. My entire life, I had believed that accuracy was self-evident, that a true figure wins simply because it is correct. But a number only wins if someone with credibility reads it aloud. And he had spent 18 months quietly bankrupting mine. He didn't need to disprove my evidence. He simply needed to ensure that by the time anyone looked at it, it would be dismissed as the scrapbook of an unstable wife. My hands shook that night while doing the dishes, not out of fear, but from recognizing the sheer scale of what I was facing. He wasn't hiding from the audit. He was auditing me. My rock bottom was quiet, like everything else. Fiona stopped returning my calls, eventually agreeing to meet for coffee just to tell me gently, "Cora, everyone thinks you need to let this go. You're starting to seem obsessed." Beatrice told a cousin, who made sure to tell me. That poor Arthur is living with an investigator, not a wife. Even my own reflection was beginning to doubt the numbers. And here was the reality I had to face. They were offering me an incredibly comfortable exit. Drop the inquiry, sign the standard papers, keep the Richmond house, remain the reasonable Cora. And in 5 years, this would just be a story about a difficult chapter. The other path had no guarantees whatsoever. Just the truth, standing there like a job that no one else wanted to do. At 2 a.m, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the draft form had been staring at me for 9 days. I thought about my mother, who had screamed and been dismissed as unhinged. I thought about myself, who had whispered and been dismissed as insecure. Volume was never the actual variable. The variable was whether anyone was willing to pay a personal price to be believed, and whether that person was ever going to be me. I thought about a 9-year-old in Scranton learning that charm keeps the electricity on, and a 9-year-old in my mother's house learning that silence keeps the peace, and how we had constructed an entire marriage out of our respective survival strategies, his noise, and my hush, and how only one of us had been paying the utility bill the entire time. Then I typed my name into the affidavit signature field, Cora Marie Vance. I clicked submit and sat in the blue light of the screen, listening to the refrigerator hum. Some signatures cannot be unsigned. I know that better than anyone. That is precisely why I signed it. Compliance moved far quicker than I anticipated and much colder than I had hoped. Within a week, I was seated in a windowless conference room on the 2nd floor with Julian Crane, our chief compliance officer, a man built like a heavy steel filing cabinet, wearing wire-rimmed reading glasses. He didn't offer thanks. He didn't offer words of comfort. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table and outlined the boundaries of my new reality. From this point forward, Mrs. Vance, you do not discuss this investigation with anyone, not colleagues, not family. He looked up over his frames. Not your husband. The file had been assigned a tracking number, and tracking numbers do not care whose anniversary they disrupted. He asked highly specific questions about dates and systems, inquiring whether I had downloaded any internal documents to personal devices, appearing quietly relieved when I told him no. Everything I had flagged remained exactly where it had always lived, in Vanguard's own system, waiting for anyone who cared to look. That detail is crucial, so I will state it clearly. I never smuggled a single document. The evidence was never mine to take. It was the corporation's own arithmetic. All I ever did was refuse to continue hiding it. That night, I moved my belongings into the guest room. No dramatic announcement, no shouting. Just my pillow, my alarm clock, and the plastic bag where the jade necklace now resided, labeled in my precise handwriting like everything else I no longer trusted to memory. Arthur stood in the hallway, watching me smooth out the guest bed. For the first time in 18 months, he looked genuinely unsettled because silence from me was a currency he had never had to negotiate with. Is something wrong, honey? He asked. Nothing is wrong, I said, tucking the sheet flat. And the strange thing is, it was almost the truth. The wrong was over. The wrong had been filed, stamped, and assigned a case number. What we were living in now was simply the processing time. Word traveled up to the 6th floor within days. Not the specific details, just the general shape of it, an internal review of partnership travel and entertainment expenses across historical periods. Arthur came home carrying the news like a storm he refused to acknowledge. Some analyst is digging around. He remarked over dinner, studying my face as I served the meatloaf. Probably a routine sweep. Compliance runs these checks every few years. I passed him the salt shaker. Inside my chest. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but 14 years of month end closes have gifted me a poker face you could land a commercial flight on. He spent that week working the building the only way he knew how. Dropping off specialty coffee for the compliance team, joking with the administrative assistants, testing every closed door. I heard he even casually asked Danica in HR whether spouses are typically interviewed during standard reviews. The doors remained locked. Julian Crane's investigators do not accept coffee they didn't pay for. So the pressure came home instead, shifting sideways the way it always does. He became intensely attentive, then suddenly cold, then attentive again, cycling like a heating unit with a broken thermostat. And then, one evening while I was drying dishes, I felt him watching me from the kitchen doorway. He asked the question he had been dancing around for days, using the softest tone in his repertoire. Cora, if you heard anything about this audit through your floor, you'd let me know, right? The plate in my hands was from our wedding set. 12 years old with a small chip on the edge, but still perfectly functional. I placed it in the drying rack, looked directly at my husband, and offered him the most honest response I had left. You always say I interpret things wrong anyway. He laughed. He actually laughed with relief. That's true, he said, kissing the top of my head before going upstairs to bed. I learned the final figures the same way everyone else did, from the formal summary of findings, because Julian's team did their work thoroughly and without bias, 18 months. 6 corporate trips with an unauthorized guest profile attached. Sedona, Savannah, Seattle, Nashville, Tamarindo, Manuel Antonio. Upgraded suites, double airfares, a high-end jewelry purchase categorized as client hospitality. Resort room service, all of it routed directly through cost center 5 BD. $48,000 of shareholder funds utilized to develop exactly one client. And I was married to the program the entire time. But the finding that made my stomach turn wasn't Arthur's. 3 of those expense reports had required a secondary sign-off because they exceeded the department's standard threshold. And the signature on those documents belonged to Kenneth Hayes, Senior Vice President, Arthur's long-time mentor, the man who had toasted us at our wedding, speaking about how fortunate Vanguard was to have Arthur Vance on the payroll. Kenneth had approved Tamarindo. He had approved Savannah. Perhaps he never actually read them. Executives approve documents constantly without looking. Or perhaps he read them perfectly fine and understood that rainmakers require certain accommodations, and you hold the umbrella for them. Either way, the leadership above my husband had either known or chosen not to know, which in my profession are simply 2 different terms for the same failure. I sat with that realization for a long evening. I had spent months believing I was auditing one man's character. I wasn't. I was pulling a thread that wound its way up through the 6th floor and into the very fabric of how corporations decide whose personal luxury is considered a necessary business expense. My marriage was a line item. My silence was apparently another, and it had been factored into the budget for years. The formal interview requests were distributed on a Thursday. Mine came with a date, a time, and a sentence that made my throat go dry. Please prepare to affirm your statements under oath. Arthur discovered it was me on Tuesday, not from the compliance office. Julian's department was a vault. It came from Kenneth, who had already retained legal counsel, begun reviewing his own alliances, and apparently told Arthur to get his house in order in the most literal sense possible. My husband arrived home that evening, and for the first time in 12 years, he dropped the performance entirely. No charm, no comforting forehead kiss, no measured corporate voice. He stood in our kitchen doorway, pale and drained of color, and said, "You're the affidavit. My own wife, you're the affidavit." I said nothing. which by then I was legally required to do, and which I had also privately elevated to an art form. He didn't yell. It was far worse. He became intensely practical, and I heard the Scranton child calculate the survival math as the lights began to fade. Do you have any idea what happens if this goes through for cause? Cora. No severance package, no professional reference. Clawbacks of past bonuses, potentially legal charges. And your divorce settlement is a percentage of what exactly? Of 0. They will force the sale of this house. You will lose everything before I lose a single thing. Do you understand that? He wasn't incorrect. That is the detail I need you to comprehend. Every single threat he voiced in that kitchen was financially accurate. I had run those identical numbers myself at 2 a.m, and hearing them read back to me in his voice made it incredibly tempting to fold. He must have seen a flicker of hesitation in my eyes because he softened his posture, stepped closer, and took my hand in his. "Withdraw the filing," he said softly. "Just say you misread the ledger codes. People misinterpret transactions all the time. Cora, especially you." There it was, my entire marriage, condensed into a single sentence and offered to me as a form of mercy. I have to ask because I genuinely want to know, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Standing in that kitchen, with your home on one side of the scale and the truth on the other, would you have accepted that deal? Tell me in the comments below. No judgment either way. Some of you have stood in kitchens very similar to mine. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because the next room we enter together contains a conference table, a panel, and 2 separate stacks of paper. Sylvia Thorne laid out the reality for me in her office above the roastery, and I will present the math to you exactly as she presented it to me, because you deserve the calculations before the decision, just as I did. If Arthur is terminated for cause, she said, we'll lose his corporate income from the spousal support calculations. The restitution demands will be deducted from the marital estate before it is split. That is $48,000 off the top. The house will have to be listed for sale within the quarter. There is no scenario where you keep it. Her pen tapped against the manila folder. If you withdraw or soften your testimony to the point where the internal case is dismissed, his attorney has signaled an exceptionally generous settlement package. The house uncontested and spousal support at the absolute maximum guideline, clean, rapid, and quiet. She took off her glasses. As your legal counsel, I am required to inform you that the second option is financially far superior. It isn't even close. Then the room went quiet, and the smell of roasted coffee drifted up through the floorboards. She spoke again, using a different voice, the voice women use when the official files are closed and it is just the 2 of you in the room. As a human being, Cora, I will tell you what I have witnessed for 30 years in this practice. The clients who accept the quiet deal get the house, and then they have to live in it with the version of themselves that signed the paper. Some of them repaint every single room, and it doesn't change a thing. She put her glasses back on. The hearing is on Thursday. You do not have to make your final decision until you are sitting in the chair. I walked to my car through the crisp autumn air, sat behind the wheel without turning the key, and realized with absolute clarity that the price tag on my soul had finally been printed on a page. It was a 3-bedroom colonial home with a mature maple tree in the front yard. Wednesday, the day before the scheduled hearing, I was invited to a conference room on the 6th floor, Arthur's floor. There is no such thing as a coincidence in corporate scheduling. Present in the room were Vanguard's chief legal officer, Sinclair, a polished man who wore his professional neutrality like an expensive cologne, and Arthur's personal matrimonial lawyer. Resting on the mahogany table between them was a document dotted with bright yellow signature flags. No one used the word withdraw. Corporate attorneys never use the actual words. They spoke of clarifying the record. They spoke of an amended statement acknowledging alternative administrative interpretations of travel classifications. In exchange, they explained the corporation anticipated handling Mr. Vance's matter internally, professional coaching, a structured repayment plan, no formal termination. And Arthur's counsel confirmed that ownership of our primary residence would convey to me in full, alongside spousal support terms I won't detail because they were designed to buy cooperation. Sinclair slid the document and a pen toward me. This resolves the matter cleanly for everyone, Mrs. Vance. Vanguard avoids public noise. Your family avoids financial hardship. Everyone wins. There it was at last. The entire corporate apparatus summarized in a single sentence, spoken aloud by a man in a tailored suit. Everyone wins. The company keeps its high-performing rainmaker. The rainmaker keeps his reputation intact. The executive mentor keeps his signature hidden. The wife keeps her comfortable home, and the only casualty is a stack of accurate numbers. And really, who mourns a number? I asked how much time I had to review it. 48 hours. They replied, though the hearing was scheduled in 24, which told me everything I needed to know. They wanted my signature on that paper before I ever sat down in front of compliance. I stood up, thanked them for their time, took the copy of the document I was legally entitled to keep, and walked out. Inside the elevator, riding down alone between the 6th floor and the 4th, I spoke the phrase aloud to the empty space just to hear how it sounded in the air instead of my own head. Everyone wins. Then, quietly, accept me once again. That final night, I didn't sleep and I didn't bother trying. I sat at our kitchen table, the epicenter of my entire marriage, and laid out all the evidence one last time, like a final monthly close. The unsigned settlement agreement on my left, its yellow flags glowing under the light. My draft affidavit on my right, and in the center, the plastic bag containing the jade necklace, which I had stopped wearing but could never bring myself to put away in a drawer. 12 years. I evaluated the accounting honestly. There was genuine love in the early columns of our life together. I won't let anyone rewrite that history. Sunday morning pancakes, road trips to the mountains, and the year he held me through my mother's funeral like a pillar holding up a roof. But every marriage maintains two separate sets of books, the public ledger you show to guests and the true ledger. And in the true ledger, I had been silent in every single language a woman can possibly use to keep the peace. Silent at dinner parties, silent in our kitchen, silent in a green linen dress at a breakfast table in paradise while another woman ordered my husband's breakfast. And every instance of my silence had been recorded by the system as consent. That is what the settlement agreement actually represented when read plainly. One final silence, the largest denomination they printed. And this time they were willing to hand me a house in exchange for it because they had finally realized my silence was no longer free. The refrigerator hummed in the dark. Around 4 a.m, I washed my coffee mug, placed it in the rack next to our chipped wedding china, and went upstairs to lay out my clothes. The charcoal gray blazer, the one I wear when I need to testify to something that cannot be unsaid. In the morning, I placed the plastic bag containing the necklace into my purse, drove to the corporate headquarters through a clear autumn light, and did not rehearse a single word of my statement. I wasn't preparing a performance. I was simply preparing to sign my name. The compliance committee convened in a space I had walked past for 14 years without ever entering. 2nd floor frosted glass. A conference table far too large for its actual purpose. No public audience, no theatrical drama. Just 5 committee members with water glasses, Julian Crane with his folders neatly aligned, Chief Legal Officer Sinclair in the corner radiating neutrality, and a professional court reporter whom Vanguard retains for formal statements. She was a petite woman whose stenography machine made the only warm, rhythmic sound in the room. This is what a real reckoning looks like, by the way. Not dramatic confrontations in ballrooms, climate control, gray carpet tiles, and someone politely asking if you would care for a glass of water. On the table in front of my chair, I personally arranged 2 items. On the left, the unsigned settlement document with its bright yellow flags. On the right, my formal affidavit. I wanted both clearly in my field of vision. I had earned the right to see them side by side. They escorted Arthur in a few minutes after me, in accordance with company policy. When an investigation's findings formally name an employee, they are entitled to hear the affirmed statement that concerns them. He dressed for the occasion, of course, his tailored navy suit, his luxury watch, the exact expression he utilized on skeptical buyers. As he passed my chair, he let his hand rest briefly on my shoulder for a single second, a public display for the room, a supportive husband standing by his confused wife during her difficult moment. I let his hand rest there. I let them all witness the gesture. Then Julian Crane opened his file, read the active case number into the record, and looked at me over his wire rims with a completely neutral expression. The room became so quiet I could hear the court reporter's machine breathing, the hum of the air conditioning, and the weight of 12 years vibrating in the ceiling vents. "Mrs. Vance," he said before we begin, "the committee understands that you may wish to amend or formally withdraw your statement. Do you wish to amend or withdraw your affidavit, Mrs. Vance?" In the silence that followed Julian's question, I felt every potential path my life could take pass through that room like a current. To my left, the yellow flags, the Richmond house with a mature maple tree. Cora the reasonable, restored to her respectable standing. Everyone wins. To my right, a page of verified figures with my signature required beneath them. I looked at my husband. He gave me the briefest, most confident nod. The encouraging nod you give to an anxious junior colleague. "You've got this, honey." Say the correct words, he still believed, even then at the absolute precipice, that I was recorded on his books, that my 12 years of quiet had been an ongoing agreement. I reached into my bag, pulled out the plastic Ziploc, set the jade necklace on the mahogany table with the silver leaf clasp coiled inside, and slid it toward Julian Crane with 2 fingers. "For the record," I said, "this necklace was purchased in Tamarindo for $100 and expensed to the company as a corporate hospitality gift. Approval code A Vance, it was my anniversary present. I would like it formally logged alongside the hotel folio and the airfare records." The stenography machine ticked. One of the committee members closed her eyes briefly, the way you do at a memorial service for someone you didn't personally know. Arthur whispered my name once. Cora. And that single word carried 12 years of history in it. I will tell you the truth. It hit its mark. It cost me an immense amount of willpower to keep my hands completely still. He had spoken my name over morning pancakes, in hospital corridors, and into my hair at my mother's gravesite. And now he was saying it in a corporate conference room to prevent me from speaking my truth aloud. "You're correct about one thing, Arthur," I said, and my voice emerged completely level, month, end close level. "It is just numbers. So I am going to let them speak." I asked Julian Crane for his pen because my own was in my purse beneath the unsigned settlement, and I refused to reach past the truth to obtain it. I signed the bottom of the affidavit Cora Marie Vance, the exact same signature that closes our corporate books every single month. Then I pushed the yellow, flagged settlement agreement across the table back toward Sinclair, completely unsigned. Quiet was never a yes. I told the room the record, and every single year of my life that was listening. The stenographer's machine captured the words. That was all I had ever truly wanted, an official record. What happened to Arthur over the next 4 minutes is something I will describe with absolute precision, because I promise to be honest. And the honest truth is this: it was not satisfying. It felt like watching a building being demolished, a building you used to live in. He began with his standard polish, requesting an opportunity to respond. The committee permitted it, and out came the familiar Norfolk Crane voice. Block bookings, industry standards. My wife undergoing immense personal strain, but partnerships require cultivation. But this room wasn't buying anything. I watched my husband realize, in real time, that he had finally encountered the one audience where his personal currency held absolutely no value. A committee member read out the backdated approvals on the modified Costa Rica expense report, citing the exact system timestamps, and asked him to explain the sequence of events. He couldn't, because arithmetic doesn't blink first. His sentences became shorter. His hands became restless. His watch caught the fluorescent light, and then his mask didn't just drop, it slid away entirely, leaving him looking exhausted. And in one final, honest moment of my marriage, Arthur Vance looked around that table at faces that remained completely unmoved and said quietly, almost to himself, "If I'm not the guy everyone likes, then I'm nobody." No one offered an answer. There is no accounting code for that realization. And I sat there, the only individual in the room who understood exactly what it cost him to voice those words. The Scranton child, the utility worker, the cold winter. I felt the ghost of sympathy pass through me, real and then gone. The committee chair thanked him. Security escorted him from the premises. Standard procedure for the circumstances, entirely uncinematic. A polite compliance officer in a polo shirt carried Arthur's security badge in a small white envelope. At the door, my husband turned his head and met my eyes. I didn't look down. I owed the official record that much too. The consequences arrived in the precise order that real consequences always do: paperwork first. Arthur was terminated for cause the following week. Restitution of $48,000 was structured as a formal repayment plan negotiated by his counsel. There was no prosecution. Corporations rarely invite the public noise of a trial when they can secure the quiet resolution of a signature. And I, of all people, understood the value of quiet, so I didn't press the matter. Kenneth Hayes announced his early retirement, that exact same month, effective immediately, with the company releasing a statement of gratitude for his years of leadership. A card circulated on the 6th floor that employees signed without actually looking one another in the eye. His retirement package remained completely intact. Of course, the system never punishes its own signatures, it simply relocates them, the same way some men relocate rules. Chloe Sterling resigned from the Charlotte office before her scheduled interview date and relocated to Dallas. I never spoke to her once throughout this entire experience, which some people find unusual. They expect a dramatic scene where the wife confronts the other woman. There was never going to be one. Chloe was a 29-year-old who had been taught by every corporate promotion she had ever witnessed that proximity to a powerful man is a viable career strategy. She was simply a student of the exact same system that created Arthur. I had no business with the students. My business was strictly with the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was complete. On the final day of October, I sat in Sylvia Thorne's office above the roastery and signed the initial dissolution paperwork, which, in Virginia, is the cooperative, quiet kind. Arthur didn't contest any of it. He had, his lawyer explained, other immediate priorities to manage. I am certain he did. He came to my apartment in November. I had taken a modest 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a brick rental building in Grand View while our house was being prepared for listing. My moving boxes were still stacked in the hallway when my buzzer rang on a Sunday evening. There was Arthur on the small, black, and white intercom screen, holding a bouquet of flowers, looking up into the camera lens with the hopeful expression salesmen use when facing skepticism. I went downstairs because I believe doors should be closed in person. He began speaking before I even reached the bottom step. Cora, please don't sign the final dissolution papers. My official appointment was scheduled for Tuesday, and then my husband, whom I had never once seen kneel for anything in our 12 years together, dropped to his knees on the welcome mat of my rental building. The flowers crushed against his chest, and begged, I know what I did. I'll go to any counseling program you want. I'm a different man now. This entire situation broke me open, Cora. I see everything clearly now. Please, I need you. I stood there on the bottom step, listening, and here is what I actually heard. And I want you to hear it clearly, too, because it took me 12 years and a forensic audit to develop the ear for it. I need you. Not I see you. Not you were right and I made the entire world call you crazy for being right. Just his personal need, arriving once again like an unpaid invoice. The exact way it always had. Men need female friends, I need you. The subject of every single sentence he had ever uttered was the exact same pronoun, and it was never Cora. You had me for 12 years, I said. And you spent me like a corporate credit card. He flinched as if the words carried a physical weight. I stepped back inside the building and closed the door gently, because I wasn't angry anymore, and gently is how you close a balanced ledger. By the following spring, our lives had settled into their new frames. The Richmond house sold in March to a young family who fell in love with the mature maple tree. After the restitution was deducted off the top and the lawyers took their share, my portion of the proceeds was significantly smaller than what the quiet settlement would have paid me, exactly as predicted. I want to be completely clear with you about that reality. The truth had a very specific price tag, and I paid it. That was the transaction I signed up for, and I would sign the exact same document today with the exact same pen. Arthur currently works at a regional pre-owned car dealership group. Sales manager. A much smaller pond, but the exact same stroke. His mother tells our relatives that I destroyed his life. Fiona and I occasionally meet for coffee. Careful, guarded coffee. The friendship walks with a distinct limp now, and likely always will. And at Vanguard Infrastructure Group, where I still balance the ledgers on the 4th floor, I am respected in the exact same way a smoke detector is respected. No one is entirely comfortable around me, but everyone is undeniably safer. But here is the single outcome that absolutely no one warned me about. The piece of this story I want to leave right here for whoever needs to hear it today. Women find their way to my desk. Not frequently and never loudly. A payroll administrator who lingered after asking a question about her retirement contributions, before quietly inquiring how I knew when it was finally time to stop explaining things away. A woman from purchasing who left a small sticky note on my monitor that read "Thank you from the quiet ones." No signature. Our dissolution was finalized on a rainy Tuesday in February, 40 minutes. No courtroom drama. Virginia's quiet kind. Sylvia Thorne slid the final decree across her desk, and I signed it with my own pen this time. The one from my desk at Ledger Control, the one that closes the month. And it occurred to me as the ink dried that this was the very first contract of my adult life where both sets of books matched perfectly. What I gave was exactly what the paper said I gave. What I received was entirely mine. I sold the jade necklace in the spring to a vintage dealer on Broad Street. He was an honorable man who examined the green stone and the silver leaf clasp and offered me $2,100, which, for the record, made me laugh out loud right there in the shop. Right at market value to the absolute dollar. The universe, it appears, also maintains a general ledger. That money purchased a comfortable reading chair for my second bedroom and a copper lamp warm enough to grow small plants under. Some evenings, I sit there with my tea and review my own account's rent, utilities, and a small, deliberate allocation for fresh flowers, ordered in my own handwriting. And I run the numbers on my quiet, independent life, the book's balance, completely. Every column, every row, with no discrepancies absorbed and none left outstanding. It turns out that was all I was ever asking for. If you take a single lesson from my story, let it be this: the peace you purchase with your own silence is merely a loan, and the interest rate will eventually cost you yourself. I paid on that loan for 12 years before I finally realized that quiet was never a yes. And the day I finally said no with my own name signed beneath it, I lost a house and got back a woman. Think about where this journey took us. A sunny breakfast table in Costa Rica. A jade necklace on line 40, one of an expense detail. A signature that couldn't be unsigned in a room with no audience at all. If someone in your life is calling you insecure for seeing the facts clearly, if your calm is being spent to fund someone else's comfort, trust your eyes. Keep your records, and know that the quiet ones are allowed to close the account. If this story resonated with you even a little, subscribe to their secret stories and tell me in the comments exactly where you were when you finally stopped explaining. I read every single one. Until next time, keep your books balanced and keep your name your own.